86. Still more on conspiracy thinking. Chalcedon Report number 47, July the 1st, 1969. In reports 44 and 45, we discussed the fact of working conspiracies as expressions of a moral and spiritual failure in a people. Wherever there is a decline and shift in the basic faith of a culture, there various conspiratorial groups can and do develop the implications of the changing standards into a new social order. The case of Emerson and the, quote, Secret Six, end quote, was cited, as significant a group as any in American history. Certain facts characterized this group. They were Unitarians. They hated the old New England Calvinism and its social order, and they hated the newer Calvinism of the South. Their answers to man's problems were statist and sociological, not Christian and theological. The responsibility of these men was very real. They wanted armed conflict as a means of changing the Union and the entire social order. But lest we make the mistake of seeing the South only as a victim, let us remember that the South succumbed to the tactics because it too was in moral and spiritual decline. A generation earlier, every southern state, save South Carolina, had been against slavery. The one question had been what to do with the slaves after liberation. After all, only a very small minority of Southerners owned slaves, and the others were especially hostile to the institution of slavery. Why, then, did the South allow itself to be pushed into a stand alien to its best interests? Why did the Southern states succeed when its best men opposed secession? The Senate debates of the era reveal the radical Unitarian self-righteousness of Sumner, but they also reveal the failure of the Southerners, except Andrew Johnson, to do more than react. They too often lacked a moral perspective to assess their situation. When South Carolina succeeded and proclaimed itself a sovereign and independent nation, a very prominent citizen of Charleston, James Louis Pettigrew, said sadly, "It won't work. South Carolina is too small for a nation and too large for a lunatic asylum." The, quotes, Reconstruction, end quotes, which followed the war was a vicious and unconstitutional order, and E. Merton Coulter's The South During Reconstruction, 1865 to 1877, a book disliked by our liberals today, is a good account of those ugly years. The liberals, in their moral bankruptcy, try to justify Reconstruction, and the conservatives condemn it. Both tend to overlook the fact that Reconstruction was first applied by the Confederacy to Tennessee at the beginning of the war, and with all the ugliness which later marked, over a long span of time, the Southern Reconstruction. Neither one justifies the other. Both indicates the moral climate of the day. A change in the religious and moral climates had made both possible. Ideas not only have consequences, they have roots. The roots of ideas that govern an age are deeply embedded in the faith of that age. To cite another example, in recent years, the US Supreme Court has radically altered the Constitution by legislative interpretations. Certainly, the judges have exceeded their authority, but their actions have deep roots in the popular mind. Recently, one of our Chalcedon Report family reported a statement made in Southern California by a teacher of a large, ultra-fundamentalistic women's Bible class. Human needs come before God's law. She was almost alone in her protest. If fundamentalist Bible teachers hold this position, need we be surprised that the Supreme Court holds that human needs come before man's law? Remember, the Constitution forbade the use of militia, that is, drafted men, for any purposes save 1. To repel invasion, 2. To suppress insurrection, and 3. To enforce the laws of the Union. President Wilson set this aside, and the court backed him. 2 world wars, the Korean War and the Vietnam War, are clearly illegal in terms of Article 1, Section 8, Paragraph 6. If this provision of the Constitution is bad, it should be amended. But if it is not, and I believe it to be one of the best safeguards of the Constitution, then why not work to re-establish it? If we let it stand as a dead letter, then nothing in the Constitution can stand against, quote, need, end quote, and expediency. Because there is now no sense of or respect for higher law, God's law, how can men be expected to respect man's law? A generation which treats God's law word lightly will most certainly treat man's law even more lightly. The roots of our problem and our vulnerability to subversion are in our moral and religious decay. Nothing is more foolish than the attempt by many to say that only a small minority of people are involved in the violence and disorder of our day, and that, quote, the silent majority, end quote, is against all this disorder. The reality is otherwise. Some polls show very happy results. Almost everyone is against higher taxes, violence, riots, etc. Well, everyone, or almost everyone, may be against sin, but they are still sinners. Most people, as one legislator has remarked, ask for lower taxes in theory, but in practice call for measure after measure which will only raise taxes. The fact is that most colleges see radical students voted into student body offices. The fact is that, according to a variety of authorities, from 1/3 to 2/3 of all college students experiment with drugs and narcotics. The fact is, with each year, our situation grows worse, and even now high school students reveal a greater degree of lawlessness than do college students. Moreover, it is feared that soon junior high schools will reveal still worse anarchy and contempt of law. The moral collapse grows deeper yearly. Are the big cities the only trouble spots? Recently, Life called attention to the problem at Fort Bragg, California, where perhaps 3 out of 4 high school students were on narcotics. And a recent news note stated that, in Greenland, 6,191 out of its 40,000 inhabitants contracted gonorrhea last year alone. The moral collapse is worldwide, on every side of the iron and bamboo curtains. Everywhere, the sources of legitimacy, the right to govern and command, are under challenge and attack. The ideas of legitimacy and authority are basically religious ideas. When the faith behind the idea is gone, the idea is soon gone. Today, the Orthodox Christian faith which undergirded our doctrines of authority is being fast replaced with humanism, the religion of humanity, and, as a result, the old authority is rapidly disappearing. It cannot be preserved by a rootless conservatism which wants to preserve the fruits without the roots. Every rootless tree is soon dead. The result is lawlessness, anarchy, and violence. But the humanism which is replacing Orthodox Christianity is unable to formulate a doctrine of authority which can give order and stability to society. Recently, the head of a major university, shown on television, addressing a convocation, deplored the use of force on his campus by both police and students. The university, he said, is a place for reason, and coercion has no place in the academic community. Everyone applauded. In fact, it was a standing ovation at this point. No place for coercion? Today, taxes are basic to, quote, private, end quotes, and state colleges and universities. Private universities and colleges are virtually all heavily subsidized by federal funds. Taxes represent an aspect of coercion. Without this coercion, the schools would soon close. Compulsory education into the teens in every state is a form of coercion, as is testing. Without police protection around the borders of our colleges and universities, the existence of these schools would soon cease. Because the humanist has no valid doctrine of authority, he creates a world of anarchy and coercion, and soon must invoke total coercion as his only answer. Marxism proclaimed a world without tyranny, without oppression, and without coercion. Not even a state, finally. And it instituted the world's most oppressive coercion. Its doctrine was pure reason, and the inevitability of those forces established by pure reason, but it made brutal coercion inevitable, because man is not pure reason, but rather a sinner who needs not only grace, but God's law order. At every point, man is and must be under God's law order, and he is either under it by grace or by judgment. To dream of a domain of reason removed from authority and coercion is to be living in terms of an illusion. The whole man meets us at every point, whether in the academy, the marketplace, the church, or the street, and to reckon without that reality is to court suicide. But we are asking for trouble. We are denying doctrines of responsibility. Dr. Efren E. Ramirez, MD, in Science Digest. Drug addiction is not physiologic. May 1969 states that the typical drug addict has a weak sense of responsibility, little commitment to anyone or anything. His life is dismally disorganized, and he can't seem to learn from his failures. He shows poor motivation to be cured, and the current belief that addiction is physiologic just gives the drug addict another excuse for saying, "I can't help myself." This is not only a good description of the addict, but of most people in varying degrees. In varying degrees, all, like the addict, want to blame their problems on someone else, their biology, their inheritance, the capitalistic system, the leftist conspiracy, and so on. There may be elements of truth in some of these things, but the basic problem is man's moral and religious failure. No addict cures himself with excuses or by documenting his problem. No society heals itself of subversion by blaming anyone or by documenting its problems, but only by changing its ways. Our revolution today is every man's revolution. In country after country, the people are voting in favour of it, at the ballot box, and in their everyday lives. The world's vote is for man and revolution, not for Christ and God's law order. People are getting what they asked for. And, in the sight of God, they have no right to complain at what they shall get. And brother, they will get it. By the way, according to the daily papers, they are already beginning to get it.